The light in the valley was the kind that lied. From a distance it looked clean, calm, almost soft. Pale sky washed out by high thin clouds, snowfields glowing under a weak sun. You could see the blue hint of distant ridge lines, the dark line of a Teeline shelf curving along the slope. It looked like visibility for days. Then the wind shifted. A low gust rolled down from the ridge, pushing a bank of mist off the far side like someone tipping a bucket. It spilled into the valley and broke apart on invisible currents, coiling through the pines, skimming over the snow. One moment the world was sharp. The next, everything beyond 50 meters was smeared into gray. The point man, Mac, stopped dead, boots squeaking on crusted snow. The team leader was a step behind him, hand lifting automatically for a halt signal he never got to give. The first shot cracked from high left, echoing off rock. It hit Mac square in the chest plate, knocking him flat on his back. The second and third rounds came before he hit the ground, snapping into the snow where his legs had been a heartbeat ago. Contact left, the rear security yelled, dropping to a knee and firing back even though he couldn't see anything but outlines of trees and mist. Then the rest of it hit. Rifles above them opened up in overlapping rhythm, firing from at least 3 points along the ridge. Rounds came in from the left, then from almost straight ahead, then from an angle so high it felt like the snow itself was spitting metal. The air filled with the flat, brutal crack of supersonic rounds and the dull, ugly thud of impacts around them. The valley they'd walked in tightened around them like a fist. "Cover! Move!" The team leader shouted, voice half drowned by gunfire as he grabbed Mac by the plate carrier and tried to drag him toward a crooked boulder jutting out of the snow. On his shoulder, the team radio crackled. "7. Copy." Static clawed through the words like someone dragging a metal comb across his hearing. He smacked the radio with a gloved hand, dropped to a knee, fired 3 fast rounds toward a muzzle flash winking in the mist. "Comms, talk to me," he shouted. The comms specialist was already kneeling behind a snow hump, antenna spread, fingers adjusting dials by feel. "They just went from bad to gone," he yelled back. "Not terrain. That's a hard wall. They're burning the air." Another burst raked the snow between them. White powder exploded into the air, turning the mist into a glowing haze. "Doc," the leader called, twisting around. "How is he?" The medic was belly down in the snow beside Mac. The plate had done its job, but a round had torn a ragged trench across Mac's unarmored thigh, blood pumping into the snow in hot, pinkish steam. The medic slapped a tourniquet high and tight, cinched it until Mac's face contorted, then rolled sideways as another burst chewed a line where his head had been. "I need 30 seconds, the medic shouted. "You've got 3. The leader shot back, scanning the ridge. In the chaos, the geometry of the trap slowly declared itself. Left of them, the ridge rose sharp and clean, broken only by dark teeth of rock and narrow tongues of trees. Above, a Teeline shelf ran like a dark belt around the mountain, the perfect place to conceal overlapping positions. In front, a rocky spine jutted up out of the valley floor, forcing anyone moving forward to curve right into open snow. Behind them, the ground sloped gently away, looking deceptively safe but offering little cover beyond shallow drifts. Any path they took was predictable, which meant every path they took was already zeroed in. "Rear, watch that right," the leader called, stomach sinking as rounds started to arrive from there too. Not many, just enough to make it clear that someone up there had plotted lanes of fire on a map before they ever stepped into this valley. It wasn't random. It wasn't panicked. It was practiced. "Peel back," rear security shouted, firing a short burst toward an indistinct shadow among the trees. "We go back the way we came. We go anywhere we can get behind rock," the leader said, but even as he said it, every attempt to move got punished. He threw a hand signal, 2 fingers chopping toward a chunk of stone 10 meters to his right. The breacher saw it, nodded, then pushed for it low and fast. He'd taken 3 steps when a burst from high right walked toward him like an invisible hand tracking a line. Snow kicked up in a tight row at his heels. He went sprawling into it, chest heaving, then scrambled back behind the same miserable slab they already had. It was like someone up there was reading their drills with them. Whoever they are, comms panted. They had this set before we even left the wire, boss. The leader's reply vanished under a new sound, one that made his stomach drop. It was deeper, slower, a pulsing cough rather than a crack. Not a rifle. Something heavier rumbled into play further up the ridge, behind the Teeline. Snow dust puffed from a rock outcrop as a round hit, gouging out a fist-sized crater. Crew serve, the leader snapped. They're walking something in. If they get that on us, we're done. Mac groaned, dragging a breath through clenched teeth as the medic finished securing the bandage. I can move him, the medic said. Kind of. Then do it. We're not dying in the open. Radio's dead, comms added. No SAT. No local. It's not just us. They're blinding the whole slice of sky. Another round from the heavier weapon hit closer, spraying rock chips. Okay, the leader muttered, glancing up along the slope, trying to find something, anything they'd missed. They're up left, high and layered behind that shelf. We need a lane, any lane. The valley answered with more gunfire, like it was mocking him. And then, cutting through it, another sound. A single shot. Sharper. Cleaner. It sliced into the chaos like the crack of a whip instead of a hammer blow. The angle was wrong for it to be the enemy up on the ridge. It came from somewhere else. Not from above, not from straight ahead. Somewhere diagonally, higher than them, but lower than the main line. A subtle difference, but in a fight like this, subtlety could mean everything. Up on the ridge, a figure with a heavy weapon staggered. He'd been crouched over a tripod, hefting a belt-fed weapon into place, pivoting its barrel down toward the cluster of rocks sheltering the seals. Now he jerked backward, as if someone had yanked a string in his chest. The weapon toppled sideways, its belt spilling into the snow. The entire table of incoming fire stuttered for half a heartbeat, just long enough for everyone to realize something unexpected had happened. What was that? The breacher breathed. Did we just get blessed? Rear security muttered. Before anyone could answer, a second crack rode, the lingering echo of the first. This one was quieter somehow, almost strangled by distance and wind, but the effect was the same. One of the figures along the Teeline, leaning close to a smaller box set on a tripod, hand pressed to a headset, folded. For a moment, he just knelt there, frozen in place, then tipped sideways into the snow. At the same instant, the team leader's radio hissed. There was no voice, no words, but the crushing, suffocating silence that had smothered the net flickered. For a blink of time, it felt like something in the air loosened. Then the hiss flattened back into static. Whatever had been done hadn't fixed their comms, but it had bitten into the thing, killing them. The mist swirled thicker, dragged by another gust of wind. In that muted, gray world, the volume of enemy fire changed. It didn't stop. It didn't even decrease dramatically, but the rhythm slipped. The precision that had punished every step went just a shade offbeat. Bursts arrived late. Some lanes fell silent while others overcompensated. The leader felt it in his bones. A pocket was opening. Now, he shouted. Doc, move him. Breacher, rear cover. They heaved Mac up between them, one man on either shoulder, the medic half crouched under his weight. They shoved forward as rounds snapped overhead and kicked at their boots. For 3 seconds, no rounds hit the strip of snow in front of the jagged rock lip ahead. The team fell into that space as if the valley had inhaled and sucked them toward shelter. Snow exploded behind them where they'd just been. One round punched into the stone lip they dove behind, showering all of them with powdered rock. They hit the ground in a tangle of limbs and gear, Mac yelling in pain as his leg bumped the rock, but they were alive. The heavier weapon tried to come back, another operator scrambling to take his dead comrade's place. But before he could seat the weapon and align the barrel, that sharp, clean rifle shot arrived again, and he toppled over the tripod. The leader pressed his cheek against the cold stone, breathing hard, eyes scanning the slope. "Where's that coming from?" he muttered. "Not them," comms said. "It's not the ridge." He was right. The angle of the impacts on the enemy bodies, the way they fell, it meant the shots were coming from a slightly different position. Higher than the SEAL's rock, but offset, close to the ridge, yet not on it. and whoever was firing didn't flinch, didn't rush. Every shot was measured, deliberate. "Friendly sniper," the medic said, squinting into the mist. "We don't have overwatch," the leader replied. "Not on this op. Could be QRF," rear security offered. "No bird overhead. No chatter." "No way they got here that fast," comms countered. The mist thickened again, wind shifting. For a second it parted along the upper slope, like curtains brushed by a hand. In that flicker of clarity, the leader saw movement. Just a figure, low and steady, slipping along the broken line of rock and scrub about 200 meters above them, cloaked in a white-gray pattern that fractured against snow and stone. No flapping fabric, no big profile, just a compact silhouette moving with the kind of unhurried, patient certainty that doesn't come from luck. He didn't see a face, just the shape of a rifle held close and a hood turned toward the ridge. Then the mist closed again, and the slope was empty. Another shot peeled out. On the ridge, a muzzle flash went dark and stayed that way. The leader's heart hammered his chest, not just from fear and exertion now, but from something else, something like awe and unease tangled together. Nobody said the words out loud. Not yet, but it flickered through each of them in some form as they lay there behind the rock, sucking in cold air and listening to this unseen hand carve space for them in a valley that wanted them dead. Whoever she was, because somewhere beneath the layers of confusion and adrenaline, the leader's brain reached back to that morning, to a wrapped rifle case and a quiet figure tracking terrain lines on a map. She was up there, above them, and with every precise shot, every thread she cut from the enemy's web, she made the same silent promise. "You're not dead yet." They just didn't know why she was here at all, or how someone nobody had wanted in the first place had become the only thing standing between them and the white sheet of the valley floor. Dawn had been harsher than the fight. Not in danger. There'd been none yet, but in the way cold seeped under the door of the forward shelter and wrapped itself around ankles, in the way breath steamed in the air above the map table, in the way everyone moved with the stiff, careful pace of people who hadn't warmed up their joints. The shelter was a squat rectangle of wood and corrugated metal hammered into the side of a hill, snow bermed up against its walls. A diesel heater in the corner rattled and belched warmth and fumes. Condensation ringed the ventilation pipe, dripping slowly onto an ammo crate someone had dragged close for a seat. The team leader stood at the head of the map table, gloved finger tracing the valley like he was already walking it. "Objective is here," he said, tapping a red circle dot above the valley that looked like nothing at all on the paper. "Sensor relay station. Unmanned. We're not there to play mechanic. We're eyes and hands. We confirm status, pull data if command wants, leave it smarter and better protected than we found it. Then we go home." He looked up at them one by one. Mac point man, leaning a hip against a crate, arms crossed, eyes half closed but listening. Comm specialist at the far side of the table, twisting the brim of a wool cap in his hands, mind already half on frequencies. The medic cradling a mug between both hands like it was the only source of heat that mattered. The breacher, big shoulders filling the corner near the door. Rear security, perched near the window slit, catching sight lines through the frost. Small element. No spare bodies. No heavy support anywhere close that didn't require prior coordination and a precious satellite window. Everything about it was lean. "On paper, this is in and out," the leader said. "Daylight, clear routes, no stopping to chat with the locals. But intel reads like half a page of shrug. We're not the first patrol to pass near this valley, but we're the first to go that close to the relay since it went down 3 days ago." 3 days, the medic repeated softly. "Enemy in the area isn't dumb," the leader continued. "They're not doing random roadside nonsense. They've been probing, hitting our antennas, plinking at comms towers, trying to blind us, not bleed us. Command wants to know if that relay is a target, a tool, or a casualty. So we're walking into maybe their favorite new thing," rear security said. "That's why we're not going alone," the leader replied, glancing toward the door. It opened as if on cue. A sheet of cold air slid in ahead of the figure that stepped through. She moved quietly, closing the door with a gloved hand before the heater could complain. White frost clung to the edge of her hood. Her pack looked heavier than anyone else's, but she carried it like it was part of her spine, not a burden. A long, narrow case wrapped in dull fabric was slung diagonally across her back. "This is your attached overwatch and terrain support," the operations officer said from near the far wall, voice dry with too little sleep. "Contracted through a sister program. Call sign Shade. She'll stay off your net unless it matters." Shade gave a small nod to the room. No smile, no swagger, just acknowledgement. The team, by force of habit, gave back what they'd been trained to, a once-over. Her kit was standard enough on the surface. Snow camo over base layers, harness set tight, pouches trimmed down and strapped close to eliminate flapping. No vanity gear. Her rifle, visible only as a short barrel and squared-off receiver under the wrap, was clean, well-used, not fresh from the box shiny. But she didn't look like one of them. Different pipeline, different units, different culture. That was clear in the way she kept a half step to the side, never pushing into the ring around the table, never claiming space the way more familiar teammates might. "Overwatch?" the breacher asked, glancing at the long case. "Overwatch," the operations officer confirmed. "High angle, low profile. She knows the ridges around that relay better than the map does." "Support?" Mac asked. "Support," the officer repeated. "Not primary. You're still responsible for your own skins." Shade's gaze drifted over the map, then fixed on the valley. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask questions. She just watched the leaders finger trace their route up the frozen streambed, across the lower slope, up toward the relay. "Comms plan," the leader said, switching to the next briefing card. "We have one satellite window on the outbound leg, scheduled check-in. One on the return. That's it. The rest is local radio to the relay, if it's alive. And line of sight back here as long as the terrain plays nice." "Which it won't," comms muttered. "We also know," the operations officer added, "that someone has been playing with interference in that sector. Not enough to knock everything out, but enough to make folks nervous. Last patrol through there got some odd static bursts like a blanket thrown over them for a minute at a time." Shade's jaw flexed. A tiny movement, hardly anything. But her eyes slid from the valley to the ridgeline above it. She reached out, gloved fingertips brushing along the contour lines. Not following the stream, not tracing the obvious route up, but hopping from spur to spur, notch to notch, as if plotting angles instead of ground. "If I were them," she said quietly, speaking for the first time, "I'd put a jammer here." Her finger tapped a notch in the ridge just above where the valley narrowed. "And if I want to catch anyone who cared about the relay before they got to it," she added, tap shifting slightly, "I'd watch the valley from this shelf and this rock spine. Enough elevation to see, not enough to snowslide down on my own men." The room went quieter than it already had been. "You think like them?" the breacher asked. "I've seen them do this," she replied. The medic watched her hand hover over the map, noticed how her knuckles hovered a moment longer over a small, crooked symbol near the red-circled relay marker. It wasn't a printed feature, more like an extra pencil scratch someone had added. Shay paused there. For a heartbeat, her eyes weren't in the room. They were somewhere else, somewhere above some other valley. Then she pulled her hand back, as if she'd touched something hot. "What's that mark?" the leader asked. "Old observation line," she said. Her tone was even, but a muscle ticked near her jaw. "From an earlier survey." "You worked that survey?" he asked. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached into her pocket, fingers rubbing against something small and metal. A token, a rounded edge, maybe a tag, maybe something older. Whatever it was, she rolled it once under her fingers before letting it go again. The movement small enough most of them missed it. "Routes?" Rear security prompted, breaking the strange stillness. The leader pulled them back to the plan. "We take the low route in. Stream bed gives cover, even if it slows us. We move before the sun gets too high and the snow glare blinds everyone. Stay tight, eyes on the ridge, but don't silhouette yourselves against the snowfields." "Extraction?" Mac asked. "Bird will be in a holding pattern 2 valleys over," the operations officer said. "They won't come near your ridge without confirmation, so don't screw around with your window. If you miss that timing, you're walking home." Comms repeated. "Fragile," the leader admitted. "We're not pretending otherwise. You keep our link open as long as you can. If someone throws a blanket over us, we fight through it and move our feet until we're out from under it. We've been seeing those blankets more often, Combs said. Feels practiced. Shade's jaw tightened again, but she didn't speak. The leader noticed. That more than anything else stayed with him. He noticed how she lagged half a step behind them when they stepped out into the morning, breath pluming in the air. How she let them take the path first, her attention not on their boots, but on the ridges above. How she tilted her head, listening for something under the crunch of snow and the soft hiss of wind. Relax, the breacher had said to her on the walk, voice joking, trying in his own way to fold her into their rhythm. Worst thing we'll see is some frozen satellite dish. You'll be bored up there. She'd given him a small, humorless smile and looked back at the valley ahead, eyes already seeing it not as a pretty picture, but as geometry. Shapes, angles, lines of sight, where the wind carried sound, where mist would pool when the temperature shifted. They looked at the valley and saw a route. She looked at it and saw a box. And when, hours later, everything went to hell exactly where her finger had tapped the map, she felt no surprise at all, only the cold, familiar pinch of a pattern she'd hoped never to see again. The wind in the valley didn't blow straight. It rolled. Every few minutes a gust would tumble off the ridge, dragging mist with it. The gray would surge forward, choking the world down to silhouettes, then thin. It made distance hard to measure and time harder to feel. The fight stretched and compressed, turning seconds into long, jagged moments and longer lulls into brief, stolen breaths. They'd made it behind a rock lip, at least. Mac was propped against its base, tourniquet holding, face pale but eyes open. The medic had his kit spread in a neat fan on the snow, hands working without looking, the way people move when training has frozen into muscle memory. "Stay with me," he murmured. "You still owe me money." Mac tried to grin and instead hissed when his legs shifted. Beyond the rock, the kill zone did what kill zones do, enforce stillness. Anytime someone leaned even an inch too far out, rounds whipped past close enough to sting their cheeks with snow shavings. The enemy wasn't wasting ammunition. They kept their bursts tight, controlled, aimed at where a human head or shoulder would appear if someone peeked from cover the way they'd been taught. The radios stayed dead. Comms cycled through frequencies, lips moving silently as he counted in his head. VHF, UHF sat. Nothing but that smothering, artificial static. "It's not just us," he said finally. "Feels like a cone. I think they dropped it right on this valley." "They're jamming the relay too?" the medic asked. "Maybe. Maybe not. Depends where they park the toy. Either way," the leader said, "we're not calling anyone right now. Assume nobody's coming." "That you're calm, everyone down voice," rear security muttered. "If I wanted to calm you down," the leader replied, "I'd tell you we're fine." They weren't. Ammo started to matter. Not because they were firing wildly. They weren't. The team drilled too hard for that, but because a pinned gunfight has a way of eating magazines. As the minutes dragged on, every burst of man fire to keep a head down up there seemed to demand 3 more from the enemy. The medic counted his remaining tourniquets and morphine amps. Comms counted spare batteries he had no use for in a jammed valley. The breacher counted how many frags he had left and didn't like the answer. The leader counted options and found even fewer. Standard peels not happening, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. They have the angles. If we try to bound right, they chew us. If we go back down the valley, they rake us from above. Forward puts us in open snow with that belt fed if they get it back up. "What if we smoke and sprint?" rear security asked. "Smoke doesn't stop bullets," the medic said flatly. From the ridge came that heavier cough again, closer this time. A round slammed into the far side of the rock lip, punching a spray of stone across Mac's boots. "They're figuring out our cover," the leader said. "We're running out of rock." He looked up, forcing himself to look past the mist, past the hiss of incoming rounds, into the structure of the world around them. Left ridge, too steep to scramble under fire. Above, Teeline shelf, hiding the guns, but also the eyes. Right, sloping ground dropping away, thin cover, bad angles. Forward, spine, and then relay slope. He caught a flicker of movement up there. Not enemy this time. Something else. Or someone. Shade. He couldn't see her clearly. Just a faint disruption in the gray. But every time her rifle spoke, something changed. When she hit the first gunner, the belt fed went quiet. When she took the man near the strange tripod box, the static cloak around them loosened for a heartbeat. Who's running them? The medic asked between pulses of fire. This is too clean for farmers. Trained unit, the leader said. Whoever's in charge knows our drills, knows our windows, knows the relay matters. They're not trying to rack up body counts. They're trying to keep us here while someone else does something. As if summoned by his words, a movement further up the slope caught his eye. A smaller group, breaking away from the line of shooters and moving higher, angling not toward them but around, toward where the relay would be above. They're going for the station, he realized. We're the decoy. Great, rear security said. They trap us and loot our tech. The leader ground his teeth. We don't know that's what they're doing. Yes, we do. Comms cut in. They've been targeting hardware for weeks, remember? If they yank encrypt, maps, anything, we'll feel it everywhere. Another burst from the ridge raked the rock, reminding them that speculation, interesting as it was, wouldn't stop bullets. Shade dropped another shot into the line, breaking up a small cluster that seemed to be coordinating the fires. But even with her cutting threads, the net stayed tight. We can't sit, the leader said. If they finish on that relay and decide they're done with us, they'll bring that belt fed down our throats. We need movement. Where? The breacher asked. You point, we run, we die. They have every lane. Not every, a quiet voice said from near the edge of the rock. She'd slid down to them without anyone noticing. Snow clung to her camo, dusted across her hood. Her cheeks were flushed with cold. Frost crusted her lashes and the edges of her mask. She kept low against the rock as incoming rounds flicked overhead, her rifle cradled in her arms, its barrel already streaked with condensation and refrozen vapor. Shade, how long have you been right there? The medic blurted. Long enough, she said. Another shot from the ridge pierced the air, followed by a distant shout. Shade hadn't fired that one. Her rifle was motionless. They're layered, she said. 3 tiers at least. Shelf, upper tree line, and one team free-roaming to plug gaps. You're not punching through them by doing what they expect. And what do they expect? The leader asked. For you to follow the book, she said. Bound, peel, smoke, retreat. They've drawn our drills on their side of the map. Every time you start to move, they're already tracking ahead of you. So what do we do? Rear security asked. Throw the book away? Fold it, Shade said. Use it to prop up the table while you move somewhere they didn't underline. Incoming rounds dug a fresh line in the snow, snapping their attention back. Shade glanced up at the ridgeline, tracking something unseen. They're adjusting for a new position, she said. Belt fed is down, but they're hauling up another threat. Probably a tube. They'll lob, walk rounds in, and crush a rock. 10, maybe 15 minutes until they've got the arcs. Options, Shade, the leader said. I don't need weather. Up, she said, pointing with 2 fingers toward a narrow traverse line higher on the slope, almost invisible where snow met rock. That's a shelf of ice, the breacher argued. Exposed shelf of ice. Exposed to anyone looking for you where they expect you to be, she countered. Not there. They built this box to keep you low. They're not watching higher than they have to. Looks like a lot of dead and not watching, comms muttered. Down here is certain, she said. Up there is not. The leader followed her finger, squinting into the mist. He could just make out the faint contour of the traverse, half a meter wide in places, sloping away to a drop, patched with ice and rock. Even if we get there, he said, we'll be silhouetted. Not if someone makes them look somewhere else, Shade said. The leader met her eyes. Beneath the frost, they were steady. No wild light, no flinching. You're leaving us, the medic realized. Not leaving, she said. Changing my angle. He shook his head. You go up there alone, and they decide to hunt you. They will, Shade said, because they need every angle to keep you here. Once you start moving, they'll feel the shift. They'll look for the thing that broke their pattern. That will be me. And you're okay with that? Rear security asked. No, she said simply. But it doesn't matter. The leader waited. Protocol said stay together. Conserve. Wait for support. But protocol assumed support could hear you. It assumed you were fighting people reacting to you, not people playing out a script written days ago. He thought of the line on the map she'd touched that morning, the symbol near the relay, the way her jaw had tensed at the mention of interference. He nodded once. Fine, he said. You do this, we need a signal. Something we can read without comms. When the volume shifts, she said, like it did before. When you feel their rhythm stutter, you move. Don't wait to hunt for me. Don't wait for confirmation. I'll cut a lane. You use it. He let out a breath through his teeth. And if you don't, then they've already found me, she said, and this valley stays closed. She set a hand on the rock, fingers spread, feeling for the rhythm of impacts for the intervals between bursts. She seemed to listen to the valley itself. Wait 10 heartbeats after the next lull, she said. Then go. Not 9. Not 11. 10 heartbeats is not precise timing, comms protested. Your pulse isn't going to be steady anyway, she said. Trust the lull, not the count. She slid away before anyone could argue more, moving like a shadow along the inner side of the rock. In the next mist swell, she was gone, swallowed by the gray. The leader felt the absence like a gap in the wall. He pressed his helmet against the stone, eyes closed for a second, listening. Above them, the rifles still barked. The valley still shuddered. Somewhere up there, the people who wanted them trapped watched through glass, listening to their own radios, hearing nothing but their side. For now, the slope above them was less a hillside and more a frozen wave broken by rocks. Shade climbed it on all fours, fingers digging into hard-packed snow, boots testing each hold before committing weight. The world narrowed to the spot in front of her, the feel of ice under gloves, the sound of her breath muffled by her mask. She moved when the wind moved. When gusts rolled down, dragging mist across the face of the slope, she advanced. When the air stilled and the haze thinned, she pressed herself flat against rock and waited. Down in the valley, the fight continued. She could hear the pattern of it even when she couldn't see it. The volley from the shelf, the answering shots from the seals, the occasional deeper thump of the heavier weapon trying to find its angle. She checked her optic once, scraping rimed ice from the edges with her thumb. The glass was clear, the world through it still white and gray and shadow. When the radios had died earlier, it hadn't surprised her. The texture of that sudden, total silence, the way every frequency went flat at once. It was like hearing an old song. She'd heard on another mountain, several years and an entire life ago, when a team she'd been part of had walked into something that felt too similar to this to dismiss as coincidence. They'd survived that day, mostly, but they'd paid. Since then, she'd learned everything she could about the kinds of devices that could blanket a valley, about where they had to be, what kind of line of sight they needed, how they liked to hide behind rocks and under tarps, how their operators tended to crouch in the same posture. Half caretaker, half gatekeeper. She crested a small lip and found herself staring up at the narrow traverse line she'd pointed out earlier. From below, it had looked bad. From here, it looked worse. In places, it narrowed to barely the width of a boot. In others, it sloped away toward an abrupt drop where broken rocks showed through the snow. One misstep would turn a quiet climb into a noisy fall. Below, the seal's rock was a gray shape in a white bowl. Above, the Teeline shelf was a darker smear, interrupted now and then by the flicker of muzzle flashes. She moved onto the traverse, hugging the rock. The wind tested her balance, plucking at her hood, tugging on the long case across her back. The cold cut through layers and bit at the exposed edge of skin between mask and goggles. Each movement had to be deliberate, each step placed with care. She found herself counting without meaning to. Not seconds, not heartbeats. Shots. One volley. Two. Pause. Reposition. Another volley. She could feel when the enemy shifted fire, when they redirected to test a new angle, when they tried to bait someone into peeking. When a heavier weapon coughed, she flattened, waiting for the impact, listening to how far off it was. Halfway along, a gust yanked mist aside, and for a moment she was exposed to the valley and the shelf both. She froze, body pressed to stone, heartbeat loud in her ears. No bullets came. They weren't looking this high. Not yet. She inched forward until she saw what she'd been listening for. Below the Teeline shelf, slightly off to the right of where the heaviest fire originated, sat a cluster of equipment half buried in snow. A small tripod, a box with cables snaking from it, a narrow antenna set at an angle. It was partially sheltered behind a boulder, making a notch in the ridgeline. Beside it, a man crouched, body hunched inward against the cold, one hand adjusting a dial, the other pressed to a headset. A second figure stood a step away, shoulders tense, rifle slung but ready. The jammer. Shade watched the man's hands move. Every time he turned a dial, the pattern of static in the air seemed to shift. Something in the distance, a helicopter that might have checked in another team's radio, would have gone silent. No doubt in her mind. Nearby, another figure, younger, leaner, stood with a rifle and an expression that didn't quite fit with the rest. Eyes darting, jaw clenched, shoulders held a little too tight. The cloth wrapped around his face didn't match the others. His boots looked worn in different ways. Local, conscription, fear, or money. Either way, not here by choice. If she shot the jammer operator now, she'd likely drop the boy too. Close as they were, any miss, any ricochet, she watched for another 30 seconds, letting the scene settle in her head, mapping it. Then she crawled to a rock outcrop just above her position, a small bulge where snow had drifted, and began the process of building a hide. It was crude and fast, no time for perfection. She stacked her pack in front of her, sunk its base into the snow to make a stable platform, laid the wrapped rifle case atop it, and unzipped just enough to draw the weapon free. The rifle wasn't flashy. Shorter than some, barrel thicker than others. The scope on top was unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what mattered. Ruggedized, simple adjustments, nothing that would flicker like a flare in sunlight. The finish bore scratches and scuffs from rock, not from show. She lay behind it, every movement slow, elbows pressed into the snow, toes digging in to control recoil, breath shallow, directed downward, away from a scope to keep it clear of vapor. Through the optic, the chaos of the valley compressed into a narrow field. The jammer team in crisp relief, the local boys' nervous motion, the slope falling away behind them. She adjusted focus, dialing out the mist as much as she could. In her ear, where a normal operator might have had a team's voices, she had nothing but her own heartbeat and the faint, familiar ringing of cold-burned nerves. She placed the crosshair on the jammer operator's head, then shifted it to his chest, closer to the center mass. Less heroic, more certain. The local boy picked that moment to lean in, watching the man's hands on the dials. Shade let the reticle drift off them both, sliding a few inches right to a rock, then back, keeping herself from locking in too early. Patience was a skill and a weapon. She had learned that young and paid for it older. On the other side of the valley, the belt-fed team tried again to set up. Men scrambled around the weapon, one of them shouting, waving his arms. He looked like a leader, or at least someone who believed he was. Shade noted him. Later. First things first. The local boy stepped back to stamp his feet, blowing on his hands. The operator bent over the box, attention fully on his work. It was the smallest separation. Half a meter. A second or two of clean space. Shade's breath stilled. The world shrank to a single point. She squeezed. The shot cracked through the valley, muted by snow and rock. The recoil came and went. The operator jerked once and dropped onto the box, his weight knocking it sideways in the snow. The local boy flinched, eyes wide, then threw himself backward behind the boulder, instinct for life overriding training. Shade adjusted, tracking the shift. On the ridge, heads turned. Someone shouted, voice sharp with surprise. For a heartbeat, firing stopped. Down in the valley, the static blanket around the seals flickered again. The hiss in the leader's radio shifted, a thin ghost of a distant voice pressing against it before fading. Not a fix, but a crack. Shade moved the reticle, found the belt-fed team. The man who'd been waving his arms stood half exposed, yelling at someone she couldn't see. Through the scope, she couldn't hear his words, but she read the posture, urgency, anger, a desperate need for things to go back to the way he'd planned them. She breathed, slow, fired. He fell into the snow, arms flung wide. The belt fed remained, but the man who knew what it was supposed to do wasn't calling shots anymore. Below, the team leader felt the change as much as saw it. The harsh, metronomic rhythm of enemy fire stumbled. For 2 seconds, both shelf and upper Teeline went quiet, as if the valley itself held its breath. Now, he whispered. Then, louder now. Move. What followed from Shade's vantage point didn't look like heroics. It looked like work. She watched the team drag Mac from behind the rock, bodies low, legs pumping, boots kicking through snow. The medic carried his kit in one hand, Mac's plate carrier in the other. The breacher and rear security laid thick, controlled bursts at muzzle flashes, not random spray. The leader moved in short, explosive sprints, pausing only long enough to cover someone else's move. They weren't out of the kill zone. Not yet, but they weren't pinned to the same dead rock anymore. The enemy responded with predictable fury. On the shelf, a man with an RPG hustled forward, tube on his shoulder. Shade could almost feel the panic in his movements. Someone had ripped threads from their careful trap, and he was trying to sew it back together fast. She shifted her rifle, tracking him. The local boy she'd spared before peeked around the boulder, eyes wide as he watched the operator bleed onto the snow. He looked lost. Shade ignored him. Morality was a luxury. She'd taken one piece of it already by not firing when they were shoulder to shoulder. She couldn't take more now and still do the job. Crosshair on the RPG gunner's chest. He stopped for a second, adjusting his stance. She fired. The tube dipped, clanged off the snow. The man dropped to his knees, then tipped over. Another man behind him grabbed the weapon, hands fumbling, suddenly unsure. On the shelf, a spotter with binoculars pressed to his face barked something, pointing. Shooters shifted their aim. Their rounds started walking toward where the SEALs were headed, not where they'd been. Shade tracked him next. The shot took him in the side of the head, twisting the binos from his grip. Without his calls, the enemy's fire lost its uncanny habit of arriving just where a man was about to be. Now it arrived where he had been a second earlier. Down in the valley, the leader felt his lungs burn. The traverse Shade had chosen for them was as ugly as it had looked from below, but gave them something their dead rock never could: options. They ducked into a shallow notch, snow packed high on either side, buying themselves a brief pause from enfilade fire. The medic checked Mac's bandage, fingers quick. Blood was still seeping, but slow now. Mac's skin was cold yet. They could keep him. Who the hell is up there? The breacher panted, collapsing briefly against the ice. You know exactly who, Combs said, bending over his radio. And you're going to feel real stupid if you get back, and you don't remember her call sign. Shade, the leader said. Her name is Shade. So move your ass like she's watching and judging the quality of your footwork. They did. Above, the enemy's commander realized something had changed. Shade couldn't hear his orders, but she didn't need to. She saw the effects. 2 men broke from the line of shooters, rifles slung across their backs, crampons digging into the slope as they began to climb sideways and up, angling toward where she was. At the same time, someone on the ridge launched a small quadrotor drone. It lifted uncertainly into the air, rotors beating, wobbling as its operator fought the wind. They weren't content to be hunted anymore. They were hunting back. Shade blinked once, measuring distance. The climbers were still a ways downslope from her, hugging the contour of the hill, following the track she'd made earlier before she'd shifted onto the traverse. That track, a faint line of compressed snow, led toward the rock where she was now. She smiled, though nobody saw. Then she backed away from her makeshift hide, moving laterally along the slope, careful to not leave a continuous path. 10 meters. 15. She found a secondary position with a slightly different angle, less perfect on the jammer site, better on the shelf. She set up again in seconds. Pack down. Rifle on top. Breath slow. Sight picture rebuilt. The drone lifted higher, wobbling in the gusts. The operator tried to steer it toward the valley, toward the rock lip, toward the place where their victims had been pinned. He didn't know yet that those victims were gone. The drone dipped, its camera panning. Shade waited. Patience wasn't passive. It was a taut wire inside her, humming. When the drone tilted just enough to give her a thin profile of its belly, she squeezed. The bullet tore through a rotor arm. The drone spun wildly, spiraling down into a snowbank upstream, rotors snapping off in a flurry of plastic. On the ridge, the operator shouted in frustration. The climbers heard the cry, glanced up, then kept climbing. Shade shifted her attention to a man near the jammer, still not the local boy, who had pressed himself fully behind the rock now, hands over his head, making himself as small as possible. This was someone else, a lean fighter with a handheld device pressed to his chest, thumb working a switch. A coordinator. When he pointed, others moved. When he lifted his hand, firing increased. When he crouched low to speak into his device, the rhythm of the entire line changed. She watched him for 5 long breaths, confirming the pattern. As she put a round through his chest, the effect was immediate and deeper than any of her previous shots. On the ridge, commands cut off mid-syllable. One team continued to fire at the valley, while another, not having heard that last order, shifted aim too far right. A third hesitated entirely, unsure whose lead to follow. The valley fell into a strange, stutter step of gunfire. Not silence. Confusion. Down below, the leader's radio crackled. 6, this is Raven, we're... Static swallowed the rest, but the voice wasn't flat. It was distant, strained, but alive. Say again, the leader yelled into his mic, even knowing it was mostly for his own morale. Raven, this is 6. Say again. A busted reply came back, garbled words, something about window and 5 mics and your position hot. It didn't matter. It was enough. Birds alive, Com said, eyes bright behind his goggles. They're above our noise. They're trying. Then we give them a reason to keep trying, the leader said. We get to the fold, and we get high enough they can see something that looks like we're not dead. The fold he referred to was a depression ahead, where the valley's floor rose briefly before dropping off toward the relay slope. It promised thicker rock, more broken snow, a little bit of concealment between them and the line of fire. Shade cleared 2 more shooters who'd anchored the far right flank, watching their bodies tumble into deeper snow. With them gone, the enemy's attempt to establish a new angle on the team faltered. The climbers, meanwhile, had closed half the distance to where they thought she was. From her new hide, Shade could hear them now, muted curses in a language she didn't speak, the metallic ring of crampons against rock, the scrape of gloved hands against ice. She saw their helmets crest a small lip below her, their bodies turned inward toward the track she'd left. They advanced along it, rifles unslung, muzzles low. One of them moved slower, protective of his partner, eyes scanning the terrain ahead. Trained, careful. Shade let them pass. Every instinct screamed at her to shoot, to remove the immediate threat. But she read their path. They were walking into the empty space she'd vacated. If she killed them now, the sound of their deaths might pull more eyes her way. She remained still, breath shallow, letting them follow ghosts. When they moved far enough past her new position, their backs toward her, she eased down, sliding into a shallower hollow, ready to move again if they glanced back. They didn't. Their world had narrowed to the tracks in front of them, and the phantom they thought they were chasing. Shade turned her attention back to the valley. The seals had reached the fold, dropping into its broken snow and scattered rocks. The medic hauled Mac into a hollow between 2 boulders, then fell into cover himself, chest heaving. The breacher peered over a rock, took a quick shot, ducked back. They're disorganized, he said, wonder in his voice. They're actually disorganized. Don't get romantic, Comms warned. Disorganized bullets still kill you. They all looked up when they heard the distant thunder of rotors. The sound was faint, filtered by the mountain, but it was there, a low, steady chop in the sky. Extraction's on station, the leader said. They're not here for a sightseeing tour. We get to them, where they leave. What if we can't get line of sight? The medic asked. Then they'll go home with an empty bird, the leader replied, voice harsh. And you and I will spend the rest of our short lives arguing about whose fault it was. More fire spat from the shelf, wilder now. Desperation had seeped into their enemy's discipline. Shade watched a man attempt to reposition a heavier weapon, dragging it forward in the snow toward a new crest with a lower profile on the valley. That move, more than anything, told her how badly they'd rattled. He wouldn't risk that equipment if he felt in control. She sighted on him. Her finger tightened, then relaxed. There was someone else. On a slightly higher outcropping behind the weapon, a figure hunkered low, binoculars around his neck, pistol at his hip, radio pressed tight to his mouth. His body language screamed command. Even in the chaos, he was trying to knit people back into a coherent force. If she dropped the man moving the weapon, another could take his place. The weapon itself would remain a threat. If she dropped the man speaking into that radio, the last strong thread holding the net together, the whole web might finally sag. She let the sight settle on his sternum. The cold in her fingers vanished as if it had never existed. There was only pressure, only the line between breath in and breath out. She took it on the exhale. The rifle bucked. Through the scope, she watched the commander jerk and fall backward. Radio tumbling out his hand, cord snapping taut. On the ridge, the larger shape of the fight hiccuped. Some men kept firing as if nothing had changed. Others, seeing their leader drop, froze. A few ducked behind rocks, instinct for self-preservation overriding tactics. The heavier weapon stalled where it was, its operator kneeling beside it, looking back and forth between the body on the ground and the valley ahead. Down below, the leader felt the valley finally loosen. For the first time since the ambush began, there was enough space between bursts of enemy fire for a man to think in complete sentences. Now, he said again, but this time it wasn't a desperate gamble. It was a command riding on an opportunity earned. They moved, not the frantic scramble from one thin rock to another, but a coordinated push. They bounded forward in pairs, one man firing while another ran. Snow flew under their boots. Breath burned in their lungs. Mac gritted his teeth and held on, fingers digging into the medic's shoulder, leg a throbbing, distant thing. Behind them, the kill zone they'd nearly died and shrank, becoming just another patch of hostile ground instead of their entire world. Above them, Shade stayed where she was just long enough to pick off two remaining shooters who'd found new angles on the fold. Then she began to move, working her way laterally again, always one step ahead of where she thought enemy eyes might sweep as they tried to reassert control. She passed close enough to the old observation line she'd marked on the map that morning to feel it in her bones. The rock formation, the shallow depression, the way the wind curved around this part of the ridge, it all echoed a memory of a younger self lying behind another rifle, watching another team walk into another valley. Back then, she hadn't understood the pattern until it was too late. Now she did, and that understanding was the only reason the team below her was still breathing. They reached the last rise before the extraction point with lungs on fire and legs numb. The fold gave way to a steeper slope, but with more broken rock and the beginnings of brush that could break up their silhouettes. Beyond it, the sky opened. The rotors were louder now, thumping steadily. A helicopter rode the air over the adjacent valley, nose canted slightly, trying to keep a cautious distance from the unknown threat while staying close enough to respond. Raven, "This is 6, the leader yelled into his mic, even though he knew the words would be only half heard. "We are moving, hot valley, high ridgeline contact, need immediate exfil." "Copy on." "Pop smoke at." The reply crackled through, chopped and fragmented, but there was enough in it to confirm they weren't alone in the world anymore. "Comms, you keep talking until your throat bleeds," the leader said. "Everyone else, we push to that outcrop there. We make ourselves big enough and clear enough they can't pretend they didn't see us." Ammo had dwindled. Magazines felt lighter. The breacher had one frag left and knew he might never find a good moment to use it. The medic had used more bandages than he'd wanted to. On the ridge, the enemy threw their last cards. A surge of fire spewed from a cluster of trees, trying to pin them at the edge of the open slope. Another small team tried to flank from above, attempting to cut them off from the rise. Somewhere back near the relay, a muffled boom rolled through the air, charges, perhaps, or equipment being destroyed. "They're finishing something up there," comms said, head turned toward the sound. The relay. We worry about what they took after we're not dead, the leader said. Right now, our job is to not give them a propaganda win. Shade's shots came less frequently now, but with no less precision. She had fewer targets that mattered. She chose them carefully. A shooter who'd found a good angle on the medic? Dropped. A man sprinting to replace him? Clipped to the knee, sending him sliding down the slope into his own men, tangling them. A gunner attempting to lay down a final lane of fire across the team's exit? Hit in the shoulder, his weapon spinning out of his grasp. Bit by bit, the coherent force that had sprung a perfect trap devolved into what most firefights eventually become when leadership dies and coordination breaks. Individual men trying to solve individual problems with limited information. That shift, more than any single shot, saved the team. They threw their last smoke as they reached the final outcrop, a thick plume of colored fog boiling up into the clear air. The helicopter pilots saw it, a sudden stain of color in an otherwise stark white landscape, and made his call. Minutes later, rotors roared overhead, blowing snow into a frenzy. The bird flared hard, nose up, side door already open, machine gunner scanning. The SEALs loaded Mac first, hauling him aboard, then climbing in themselves. The medic clung to the edge of the door, grabbing a handhold as the bird shifted in the wind. The leader scrambled up the ramp, then turned back, scanning the slope instinctively. "She's not here," the breacher shouted over the engine. "She's coming," the leader said, but there was a moment, one long, cold heartbeat, when he couldn't see her anywhere. Then, out of the mist near the upper slope, a figure appeared, moving at a steady, unhurried pace that felt at odds with everything. Shade. She came in from the side, not from the valley. She'd cut across the ridge, using her own knowledge of the terrain's quirks to stay above the worst of the enemy's remaining fire. Now she slid down the last few meters of slope, boots digging in, rifle balanced in her arms. Snow and rotor wash met in a swirling white cloud around her. For a second, she vanished in it. The leader's stomach dropped. Then she stepped through, reaching the bird with one smooth, controlled jump. The breacher grabbed her harness and hauled her in the last half meter. She dropped into a seat, back against the inner wall, rifle across her knees, like she'd just come in from a long walk instead of a pitched battle. The crew chief slapped the side of the bird. "We are out," he yelled to the pilot. The helicopter lifted, banked away from the valley. Below, the kill zone shrank with altitude, becoming lines on a map rather than a cage around their bodies. Snowfields stretched in all directions. The relay site above the valley smoked faintly, black tendrils against white. For the first time since they'd walked into that bowl, there was no incoming fire, no static choking their radios, just the thunder of rotors and the rasp of breath. On the bench, Shade's hands were steady. Frost clung to the edges of her lashes. Her face, now that the hood was lowered, was set in a neutral line, not blank, not hardened, just calm. Her gaze was unfocused for a moment, somewhere between the floor and the middle distance, as if she were still seeing the valley from above rather than out of the open door. The leader sat opposite her, chest still heaving, helmet askew. He stared at her for a long second. "Thank you," he said. She blinked, as if the word had startled her. "You moved when you had to," she replied. "You saved yourselves." "Bull," the breacher muttered. "We were dead in that bowl until you started punching holes in their script." Shade's eyes flicked to him, then back to the leader. "You had something they didn't," she said. "You were willing to improvise. They weren't." The medic sat on the floor near Mac, hand on his patient's shoulder, listening without meaning to. "Back there," the leader said, "at the map, you knew this was a trap." "I knew it could be," she corrected. "Patterns repeat. People like them don't stop using a good trick until someone takes it away from them." "And you?" the leader asked. "How'd you know where to put the knife?" She hesitated, gloved fingers twitching toward her pocket. "Angles," she said finally. "You learn to feel them. Where sight lines intersect. Where sound wants to travel. Where mist will be thickest at certain times of day. And you watch what they want, not just what they do." "What do they want?" Combs asked from the far end of the bench, voice rough. "Not you," Shade said. "Not primarily. You were the bait. They wanted that relay. It's keys, it's logs, the brain that tells your world who is moving where. You were the fly they used to make the spider complacent. The crew chief passed along a headset. Command wants a status, he said. The leader took it, listened for a second to the crackle on the other end, then handed it to comms, who rattled off-grid references, contact report, casualty assessment in a clipped, tired tone. Shade pressed her palm against her thigh, feeling the outline of the small metal token through the fabric of her pants. First time they did this, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. We didn't see the pattern until they'd already pulled what they wanted. We thought we were the main event. We were wrong. What happened? The medic asked. They jammed us, she said. Blanketed a valley not unlike that one. We'd been told the locals were ghosts that day. No one around, no friendlies to worry about. That was a lie or a mistake. I never found out which. She looked down at her hand, at the faint scars that crossed the back of it, white lines on pale skin. My spotter moved to get a better angle, she continued. Stepped up on a rock. They'd drawn that rock on their map. It was the first thing they zeroed in when they heard our comms go fuzzy. She paused, breath shifting slightly. I learned about jammers by reading what they did to his last words. The medic swallowed. The token. His tag, she said simply. I keep half. His family has the other. The symbol on the map, the leader said. The one near the relay. That was your old line. Our old line, Shade said. We watched this region from there once, long before your unit started seeing hits on hardware. Whoever is running their side now learned from those days. Took an old shape and filled it with new pieces. Same trap, upgraded bait. The leader leaned his head back against the vibrating wall, eyes closed. So this wasn't random. It was a test. And a harvest, she said. They wanted to see how your command would respond to a relay going dark. How fast, how far, how much mass you'd send. They wanted your habits as much as your keys. Did they get what they came for? Rear security asked. Not all of it, she said. We interrupted the download. You heard the charges, some of what they couldn't carry, they destroyed. But they'll have walked away with something. Enough to matter. Enough to make your next few weeks more interesting. Fantastic, comms muttered, removing the headset. Command is spinning up a follow-on, the leader said. Strike on their jamming cell, sweep near the relay. They want every piece of that kit we can grab. They should bring you, Shade said. You've seen the pattern now. You know how it feels when the world goes quiet like that. Next time it happens, you'll move faster. You talk like you're not going, the medic said. Shade shrugged one shoulder. My work here might be done. The leader shook his head. No, you don't get to disappear back into whatever shadows you came from after this. Not with what you know. Not with what you just did. She looked at him, eyes calm. I didn't do anything special, she said. I saw what they wanted and took away the hands that could reach for it. That's exactly what made it special, he said. Most people in that valley, us included, were too busy looking at what was right in front of their faces. You were watching the shape of the whole thing. He nodded at the others. You think any of these idiots are going to forget the person who walked alone into that mess and pulled the threads until it fell apart? The breacher snorted. No chance. Not a chance in hell, the medic echoed. Or, comms added, to put it more politely, if anyone back home calls you support again, I will personally correct them using nonverbal educational tools. For the first time since dawn, Shade's mouth twitched toward a real smile. The helicopter banked again, turning toward the forward base. The mountains rolled below them, endless and white and indifferent. Later, in a cramped briefing room with peeling paint and a coffee pot that looked older than most of the men who used it, they laid it all out. The leader stood in front of a digital map, tracing their route, marking enemy positions. Comms highlighted the moments when jamming hit hardest. The medic talked through casualties. The breacher described the enemy's fire discipline and how it had shifted. Shade spoke when asked, not when she wasn't. She pointed to the notch in the ridge where the jammer had Saturday here, she said. Not just because of line of sight, because it's protected from wind on 3 sides. Keeps their gear stable. Lets them listen to their own net without constant interference. She tapped where the belt fed had been. Here. Good angle on both your entry and exit routes. Solid footing for recoil. They placed it where you'd have to expose yourselves to see it. She indicated the path up toward the relay. Here is where their second team went during contact. This is where they completed whatever they did to your station. Download, upload, or planning something new. You'll need more than us to find out. A man from command, older, eyes narrowed in tired focus, scribbled notes as she spoke. Why were they so prepared? He asked. Because you told them who you are, she said. Not in words, in patterns. Every time you responded to a hit on your network, every time you moved a team to check a tower or a relay, every time your quick reaction force flew in roughly the same track, you gave them data. They stored it, learned from it, built a trap tailored to your habits. And you, the man asked, how did you learn ours? Shade's gaze drifted to the symbol on the map that marked the old observation line. I used to stand where they stood, she said, on the other side of that valley, watching, listening, trying to guess what you would do before you did it. I learned that if you want to save people from a pattern, you have to understand it better than the people who made it. The man nodded slowly. We're codifying this, he said. New doctrine, new caution around any silent valley. Your improvisation becomes tomorrow's protocol. Protocol is just improvisation that worked and got written down, she said. The room hummed with low conversation and the clatter of keys. Someone printed a report. Someone else pulled up satellite images of the ridge, marking likely remaining enemy positions. Shade stepped out when she could, slipping through the door into the thin, bright light outside. The snow around the base was dirtier than it had been in the valley, trampled, stained with fuel, marked by tire tracks. The mountains beyond it were the same, though hard, high, indifferent. She stood at the edge of the packed courtyard, watching the sky. Her hands, now that the adrenaline had drained, shook slightly. She curled them into fists until the tremor hid inside her palms. Footsteps crunched behind her. Thought you might come out here, the leader said. She didn't turn immediately. Thought you'd be in there rewriting your book. We will, he said. Later. They have enough to chew on for a while. He stepped up beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed, but not quite touching. He looked out at the same mountains, breath puffing in the cold. You all right? He asked. She considered. Heavier than it looks, she said, nodding toward a peak that rose alone, its summit wreathed in cloud. Which one? He asked. The mountain or the past? Both, she said. They stood there in silence for a long moment, listening to the distance. I owe you, he said eventually. You owe me nothing, she replied. We were all doing the same job in that valley. Stay alive, keep each other from getting killed, deny the other side what they want. You did your part. He shook his head. Before today, if someone had asked me about an attached terrain specialist on a routine relay check, I'd have rolled my eyes. I wouldn't have said no, but I would have mentally filed you under nice to have. Not necessary. And now, she asked. And now, he said, if they try to send me back into any valley that looks even half like that one without someone like you above me, I'd refuse the op. For their sake. She almost laughed. That would go over well. It would after my report, he said. Whatever you think, what happened in that valley isn't just going to be a line in some classified incident log. It's going to be a case study. People are going to sit in warm rooms thousands of miles from here and watch a replay of you crawling along that traverse. And they're going to pretend they would have done the same thing. Some of them would, she said. Most wouldn't, he replied. Because most people are afraid of being the one who leaves the rock. The one who walks alone into the full weight of the problem. Easier to stay with the group, die with everyone else, and call it fate. She thought of her spotter, of the valley that had taken him, of the way the world had gone quiet around his last breath. She thought of the token in her pocket, still warm from her skin. Fear doesn't go away, she said. You just train it to walk behind you instead of in front. He nodded, eyes still on the horizon. Command asked who you were, he said. They wanted your file. I told them they could have all the paperwork they wanted later. What matters right now is what you did. What did you tell them? She asked. That when the valley closed on us, he said, and when our radios went dead and everything we'd rehearsed started getting used against us, someone walked out of our peripheral vision and did the one thing none of us were brave enough or smart enough to consider. Which was, she asked softly. See the whole shape, he said, and then cut out the heart. He looked at her then, really looked, and there was no dismissal in his eyes now. No quiet calculation about whether she was worth the extra logistical weight. Only respect. Not loud, not flowery, not ceremonial. Just real. "Who are you?" he asked in a tone that wasn't prying, just curious. She watched a gust of wind kick up a small devial of snow in the courtyard, swirling it around before dropping it again. "Shade," she said. "That's enough." "For the paperwork," he said. "Sure." "For us?" "For the people whose lives you hauled out of that bowl." She hesitated, then nodded once, granting him something she rarely did. "In another life," she said, "I had a different name, different unit, different job. The mountain took most of that away. Shade is what's left. Shade is who shows up when someone calls and says, 'We think the pattern is back. We think someone is hunting our habits.' You choose those calls," he said, "or they choose you." "Both," she answered. "I read reports. I listen. And sometimes I see a valley on a map and feel something twist in my chest. And I walk into an office and say, 'Send me.'" "Like this time," he said. "Like this time," she agreed. They stood in silence again, letting his words settle, letting the memory of the valley thread through them. Behind them, the briefing room door opened and closed, voices rising and falling. Plans were already being made. Strike packages assembled. Taskings rewritten. Doctrine shifted by degrees. In a week, someone would be in another room, halfway around the world, using the phrase pattern-based ambush in mountainous terrain as if it were an abstract exercise rather than a memory of nearly dying in a bright, lying valley. In a month, patrol briefings near any relay site like that one would carry a new line. Historical use of jamming and pre-planned fire lanes in this sector. Overwatch requirement, mandatory. Shade would become a citation in a slide deck. Her decisions would turn into bullet points. But here, now, on the cold-packed snow outside a forward shelter, she was just one person staring at a horizon that would never be neutral to her again. The leader finally turned to go. "They'll probably want to talk to you," he said. "Higher, I mean. Remotely. Ask you to explain your instincts like they're equations." "They'll be disappointed," she said. "Maybe," he said. "But the ones who matter will understand there are some things you can't write down. You can only show them. Like walking out of cover when everyone else is trying to become part of it." She almost smiled again, but didn't quite. "You gonna be all right?" she asked, nodding toward the building, toward his team. "We'll heal," he said. "We'll bury this under other ops, other days. But if I ever see mist roll into a valley the way it did today, I'm going to hear your rifle before I hear my own heartbeat." He took a step away, then paused. "If they call us out there again," he said, looking back over his shoulder, "and you're anywhere near, I'm going to request you by name." "You don't like flying blind anymore?" she asked. "I've never liked it," he said. "I just didn't know there was someone who could see in that kind of dark." He went inside. Shade stayed a moment longer, fingers closing around the token in her pocket, feeling the familiar edges bite into her palm. "Pattern broken," she murmured to the empty air, to a man who wasn't there anymore. At least once. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of rotors in the distance as another bird lifted off, heading toward some other mission. She turned back toward the shelter, toward the debriefs and the questions and the paperwork that would try to pin down what couldn't fully be written. Somewhere, on some future day, another team would find themselves in another valley, snow bright under a lying sky, radios going dead, enemy fire coming in perfect, impossible lanes. They would feel their world shrink. They would think they were alone. If she had anything to say about it, they'd be wrong. Because when the call came, she would go where the mist rose and the patterns repeated. And when the valley closed on them and the kill zone formed and someone asked, with fear tight in their throat, "Who is she?" they would already know the answer. She's the shadow in the white. The angle no one saw. The quiet presence no one asked for. The one who steps out of the peripheral vision of men who think they're done and proves them wrong.